Greetings, fantasy football fans, and welcome to a best ball discussion on the Big D podcast. Before I bring in the night's special guest, please subscribe, like, and share the Spucky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. We've got a lot of fun, not just content, but hopefully some announcements coming in the upcoming days. So please pay attention to that. There may be some additions. We'll see what happens with the YouTube page and podcast, but can't wait to share those with you. So, if you know me, you know I am a fantasy football junkie. I try and get in different kinds of leagues every year, and this year I have entered a best ball fantasy football league for the first time, and literally am wondering what to do. So, luckily, joining me tonight is my friend Kyle Senra. Kyle is literally doing best ball dynasty redraft leagues, whether he's awake, sleeping, or hosting his own podcast. Right, Kyle?
Yeah, I think I have made picks while hosting. I'm sure I've dreamed about making picks too, and woken up like, oh no, did I make the wrong pick? Oh wait, that draft didn't happen. I dreamt about that one. But yes, yeah, fantasy football all the time. I think we both love that. And yeah, I've been also trying to expand my best ball portfolio. I've kind of maybe dabbled. I know John Bosch does these eliminator best balls, and I've joined a couple of those each of the last 2-3 years, and those are, it's a best ball draft. And the eliminator aspect there is simply that the lowest scoring team every week is eliminated and taken out of the league. So you kind of just have to survive. And yeah, so I've decided not only go to those, but more traditional best ball styles. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. What is best ball, right? Like that's that is the question. And so I guess with that, best ball is simply a philosophy or concept, and it's a scoring philosophy. It's that every week, instead of setting a starting lineup like in most traditional fantasy leagues, whether it's redraft or dynasty, instead of that lineup setting, your best lineup is automatically set for you every week. So it really does come down to the drafting, the team build, roster construction, and then not that you've done the work draft to kind of let the chips fall in season where you really don't have control. A lot of redraft best balls are draft only. You draft the team and that's it. That's all you have for the year. I know all the eliminators are done that way. Theoretically, you can have best ball in other formats, though. It doesn't have to just be redraft. You can have dynasty best ball. In those leagues, usually the only thing that's different is the scoring, like that your best lineup is set every week. But in dynasty best ball, you'll usually still make waiver additions, certainly trade. So that is more just the scoring. Whereas redraft best ball, in theory, you could do a redraft best ball league where you are making waiver additions or trading. But in my experience, most of the time, it's just draft only, rosters locked, and that's all you have. So it really does come down to how well can you draft. And I know I'm just looking back through my teams prepping for this episode, some of the teams, because generally you draft and maybe pay attention to the portfolio, but in season, the eliminators I'd check on just to see, okay, have I been eliminated yet? But most of the other best balls, probably not planning to look at through the season to see at the end of the year what the results are. And yeah, so far I've looked through and it's like, oh, there's Todd Gurley on a team, Le'Veon Bell on a team. Oh, there's a couple of Johnson shares. He's cut and may not be playing this year. So that's those are some roster spots that obviously are suboptimal, empty spots. But that's the thing with best ball, especially with on. It seemed like he was a good price, but risk reward. So yeah, hopefully that gave everyone the best example of best ball I could muster.
I hope nobody drafted or will draft Tim Tebow in any best ball leagues.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's one of those things, and one of the you might hear when people refer to best ball, this player is better in best ball, right? Like the idea with best ball is those players that will score random touchdowns that you wouldn't know where that's going to come from. You can't really predict. It's really difficult to predict that in terms of, oh, I'm going to choose to put this player in my lineup this week because I think that. Whereas with best ball, you kind of let those touchdowns come in. Now, I guess depends on if your league has touchdowns or not. And we can get to that later. But Tim Tebow would be someone where I don't have any shares. I didn't draft him at all, but I would have more likely done it in best ball than I would have in a regular redraft if he had kind of made it through the season. someone like Taysom Hill, right? Like I'm more willing to go after Taysom Hill in best ball than I am in redraft, thinking that when do you know when to play Taysom Hill? Like, okay, if he gets those rushing touchdowns or if he randomly does throw a touchdown, like those are the spike weeks for him. But it's tough to know when those are coming. You kind of can, in theory, do it any week. So the best ball beauty is, so I've got a couple of Taysom Hill shares just as this, okay, he's this extra ceiling guy, usually as a third quarterback. If my, one of my two quarterbacks falters and he happens to get touchdowns that week, he can kind of make the lineup. So that, like, Taysom Hill, I think, is a good example of a player I'd much rather have in best ball than any other format. And I suppose in theory, Tim Tebow was that too, but to a much less extent. And yeah, I didn't end up with any of him. I wasn't really buying in. For anyone who expected him to make the team, it would have made sense, but I was kind of expecting he wasn't going to make the team. Someone with 0 career catches in college and NFL combined probably wasn't going to play tight end. I had this inkling for some reason, so I stayed away from Tebow and basically the Jags tight ends in general. Who knows what's going on there?
Yeah, as a Jags fan, I still believe we need a tight end, but that's a story for another day. So, in terms of drafting, depending on how many teams are in your league, whether it's PPO, half point, full point, whether it's 6 point of passing touchdowns, full points of passing touchdown, how do you set up how do you set up a roster? And also depends on where you're drafting, because if you got the number one pick, you're more likely to take somebody like Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook. But if you draft, let's just say ninth, you might go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think you said it best, going through what's the scoring and how's the roster, like how many players you have to start each, like total. So it's not, and I mean, your number of teams is a factor, but also so is total number of starters. If you have two 12-team leagues, but in one you start 9 and the other one you start 13, well, that one where you have to start 13 players, depth is going to be more important, and the number, like who will qualify to make your lineup, it's going to be, that threshold's going to be much lower because you need 13 guys to get in there. So number of teams and number of starters is important. And like you said, the scoring settings, you figure all that out. And that's kind of like the baseline research of not just best ball. That, like, I go into any draft, that's the first thing I want to know. Like those are my first questions for any league. Like anytime I want, like someone asks me a trade question, I go to that. Well, what are the parameters you're trading within? That context is important. So that's like the first step. And then from there, generally the first thing I look at is how many quarterbacks do you start? Because I think that totally determines where quarterbacks are going. If it's only start one, then I'm in my strategy, and this is not just best ball, this is just really my quarterback strategy doesn't change at all. Best ball to redraft or dynasty, it's pretty much the same. If it's one quarterback, I'm fine waiting and grabbing what I perceive as top tier options going later, not necessarily going after Mahomes and Allen and Murray, going for guys in that same tier. The ones usually going the latest for me are Dak and Herbert. Going after one of those guys a couple rounds later is kind of where I targeted single quarterback. Super flex, though, I'm aggressive and I'm going after quarterback in the first round, maybe even first 2 rounds. It all depends on where I am. So certainly, I think super flex early, I'm definitely going quarterback. Like, to me, I wouldn't consider, what I assume is the highest non-quarterback is Christian McCaffrey for most people in most formats, whether it's dynasty, redraft, any form of best ball. So I'm considering McCaffrey probably right around Dak, Herbert. Like, I think you mentioned I already mentioned those 3, Mahomes, Allen, Murray, Lamar Jackson, Prescott, Herbert. So anywhere kind of in that 5 to 7 range is where I'd consider McCaffrey. But I really want to be aggressive at quarterback, simply because if it's early and you're sitting at the 103, 104, you don't know how the rest of the league is going to draft quarterback. So I'd rather be extra aggressive, go after Kyler Murray or Lamar Jackson right there. If my league isn't being aggressive on quarterback, I might be the one, I'm going to dip in, get a second one at that 2-3 turn and really push the issue. Or if I see that everyone's taking quarterback, then okay, then I strengthen my roster elsewhere. I've already got my QB1 secured. Then I'm going to go after probably a good running back one there, or if it's tight end premium and an elite tight end falls to the end of the second, grab them there. So I think that first question really is, how many quarterbacks do you start? Because I think that determines everything to me. Like, at least it determines a big bunch, and it certainly determines the first round.
Yeah, well, yeah. When my friend Alex and I did a couple of mock drafts, we varied our position. Like the first one, we were like early. Second one, we were late, and third, we were middle. And to be honest, these drafts are so unique because you do a four. I'm in a 14 team league, and it's so it's so interesting what happens because you see one draft and it's running back and the quarterbacks are going off the board early, but another draft the quarterbacks aren't really flying off the board.
Yeah, each draft is its own unique thing, and you have to be able to adapt to what's going on in the draft. So I think going in with strategies and ideas is good, but also knowing that I'm going to be flexible. Like where you're going to be most rigid is if you're picking in the first 5 picks. That okay, well I know what I'm probably going to do, especially with me with my quarterback tiers. I'm just going to take whoever I have as the highest ranked quarterback usually if it's super flex. But then yeah, as you get later in the draft, you're not really sure what that first round's going to be, and you really have to kind of adjust on the fly. Especially in the middle, you kind of if you're on the ends, you kind of get 2 picks to kind of make something, but really in the middle of drafts, you only get the one with less intervals in between, but you still only have that one at a time. So you really have to kind of see how the draft is playing out. And I find, yeah, you can't force the issues as much in the middle. You kind of really have to see what the draft gives you and really optimize value where it lands.
One area I've gone in best ball drafts is taking Travis Kelce early, and be honest, I know a lot of people said get Travis. If you can't get one of the top running backs, take Travis Kelce early and often. Am I crazy for taking Travis Kelce first round in a best ball draft?
Oh, not at all. I think in super flex, I usually want to be
In a
more aggressive.
non
Yeah,
super flex league.
but even in super flex, I think it's an argument to be made for the first. But certainly, I think in a non super flex, I could say be aggressive and go as high as the 103, and it's all going to depend on scoring and formats. But like I really like McCaffrey, and it seems like Dalvin Cook has been not only a workhorse but also consistent. It gets consistent amount of targets as well. You really want that pass catching upside. So the outside of those two, which is my top tier at running back, like I think Kelsey at 103 is fine. So, you really, it's tough. It's tough to sell me on the argument that he's going too early in the first round, just because that positional advantage. If he replicates what he did last year, that's amazing. If he doesn't, he could still be the tight end one, even in, if he gets 300 yet less yards, maybe a touchdown or two less, he might be the highest scoring tight end. So that is worth a lot in that type of high upside weekly, but also solid floor consistency. Like to me, there's no wide receiver I'd want. So it's definitely, you're debating between where's Kelsey among your running back ranks. I think that's at least the way I kind of try and where do I want to put him? So I kind of have him slotted in there right after that top tier. So I think that's really the question to ask is compare Kelsey to every other running back. Because I think he's ahead of every other wide receiver, even if he doesn't necessarily score better than every wide receiver. Although last year he was pretty close. I think he was like the wide receiver too. 3 maybe depending on the scoring. I guess maybe
I think Kelsey
4 perhaps.
I think Kelsey was like second or third in receiving yards last year
Mm-hmm.
behind Stephon Diggs.
Yeah. So, the guys that maybe outscored him last year, Adams had 18 touchdowns. He probably outscored him. Tyreek Hill, maybe. But they're like maybe 3 wide receivers outscored him last year. And while you can kind of replace their value more easily than what you can with Kelsey. So yeah, I definitely take him over any wide receiver. And then again, it's Kelsey versus those first round running backs and where you slot in. So yeah, I think it's fine to take Kelsey in the first round. That was a really long way to say that.
So, be honest, which wide receiver would you take first? Because, I mean, there are different wide receivers you could go. Obviously, Cheetah's a popular name. Devontae Adams, whether Aaron Rodgers plays the whole year. But to me, I mean, would DeAndre Hopkins, because of his consistency and the fact that he plays in an up-tempo offense, be your first choice in a best ball league?
No, I think not, because the high ceiling Hopkins that was getting kind of like 17, 18 points a week, points per game per week, that kind of like rivaled what Adams was doing on so many touchdowns or Tyreek Hill on his yards efficiency. like that didn't really exist last year in Arizona. It dipped, I think, in half point PPR was 14.4 points a game. And I mean, that was fine for like the second tier of receivers. That was the same amount as DK Metcalf, same amount as Justin Jefferson, just a little behind AJ Brown, I think within a point of AJ Brown and Calvin Ridley, but it was still, 4 or 5 points behind those guys at the top. Especially Adams last year was kind of ridiculous. I don't necessarily expect him to score 18 touchdowns again, but I really, for me, the candidates for wide receiver one overall are, I've already named them: Adams, Hill, and Diggs. I think the combination of volume, yards efficiency, and especially with Stephon Diggs. I mean, with Adams, again, I don't expect 18 touchdowns. 12 seems realistic. He's done that before a couple times in his career. So I don't know that he's going to just outscore everyone by a ridiculous pace. I mean, he probably will still be the wide receiver one. I give it a 25% chance between him, Hill, and Diggs again, and then like the rest of the field for that other quarter. But Diggs, I think, really has a chance to move up touchdown wise. Peter Howard's calculated this. It's like I think a 10-year average. I guess more than that. I think it's since the year 2010, so 11-year average. Basically, the NFL average is a touchdown every 154 yards. That's rushing, receiving touchdowns. That is not counting quarterbacks. And Diggs last year, on his volume and his number of yards, probably should have had double-digit touchdowns. He only ended up with 8. So if Stephon Diggs repeats his production, he could realistically see a touchdown increase. And that could make him the number one wide receiver. If he gets to 12 touchdowns, again, on 166 targets, it was close to 150 catches, 1,500 yards. If he can do that with 12 touchdowns instead of 8, like he's something a couple points per game more, he might rival Adams and Hill as the wide receiver one. So I think it's those three for me. If I had to pick one for sure, especially in best ball, I think it's Tyreek Hill, just because his absolute like league winning upside, when he scores a touchdown, it's usually going to be a long bomb. Whereas, Adams will, we saw a lot last year. There's a lot of 1-yard touchdowns. So yes, that tons of touchdowns is great, but rather than the 6 points for a touchdown and maybe 7 with the reception, if you can get a 70-yard touchdown with that reception and the touchdown and get like 13, 14 points per score instead, like I think that, especially in best balls, is a good weekly upside where, if Hill has a bad week, he won't be in your lineup. Whereas in a like a redraft or dynasty league, you're going to play Tyreek Hill every week, knowing that, okay, there'll be some bad weeks, but in best ball, you don't have to make that decision. So if he has a bad week, he doesn't end up in your lineup. So especially in best ball, I say Tyreek Hill is my number one wide receiver.
Would you still think? Would you still think about taking Saquon Barkley or Ezekiel Elliott, because Zeke didn't have his best year last year? I'm sure you're hearing the Dak Prescott shoulder merry-go-round. And Saquon Barkley's coming off that torn ACL, and we know running backs are generally not quite the same first year off a knee injury.
Yeah, I'm buying more between those two. I'm definitely buying more into Zeke. He's healthy. Really last year was the first time he ever missed a game due to injury in his career. So like he's been for especially the amount of carries he's gotten, he's been a very relatively healthy running back. So I'll continue to bank on that. Maybe this last year was the decline, but what we saw at the first start of the year, he was getting top 5 running back numbers when Dak was in. And I'm on a John Going for Two live stream called live network. We stream usually every Thursday. It's called the Dynasty Gambit, and on there we've got Dr. James Ferretti. He is a he is a radiologist, but as an MD, he is a medically licensed doctor, and he doesn't seem concerned with Dak at all. And I mean, we talked about that. We kind of brought up the question. It seems that, most quarterbacks are probably dealing with what Dak's been dealing with. Maybe not to his extent, because it's all the time off he had, like not just through the off season, but missing most of the regular season as well. But like, I'm sure Joe Burrow's dealing with it too. Really, like any of the quarterbacks, like Trey Lance is probably dealing with it a lot because he had basically a full year off, right? So it's really just the only reason Dak is being looked at so cautiously is because the Cowboys have invested so much money into him. They're not taking any chances with him. I have no doubt in my mind he's going to play week 1. This is just, it's like of course he's going to be sore after throwing so much a training camp after months of not doing it, right? Like most quarterbacks are dealing with it. It's just the soreness of training camp, but Cowboys are just being overly optimistic. That's the Doc's story on it. And I trust his judgment quite a lot. So he doesn't seem affected at all. And I know since then I've been drafting Dak no problem. So I'm kind of all in on Dak. Like he might get another injury. It's football. Like it's so possible, but it doesn't seem like this is going to keep him out at all or affect his play.
That answers my death question whether or not to get him. But so who at quarterback, running back, tight end, receiver? What players are you targeting the most in best ball drafts? Start at quarterback.
Yeah, so I looked through. So I've done 9 best ball drafts so far. I think there's still a couple more to come for me in the coming weeks. But right now, my most rostered quarterback is Ryan Tannehill. So 3 of those 9 leagues, so 33%. And then the couple guys with 2 shares, Mahomes, the top 3 rookies, Fields, Lance, Lawrence, and then Drew Lock, Carson Wentz. Not so crazy about those last 2, but apparently I've been, especially in best ball, aggressive on the rookies. But yeah, Ryan Tannehill, my most rostered quarterback. Pretty sure that was the case last year in all formats. It's probably going to be the case. I think he's such a value everywhere. I have him from a redraft perspective, and quarterback scoring really isn't going to change in best ball. So my redraft rankings are going to be the same for best ball from a quarterback perspective. Really, the one position that's probably going to change the most is wide receiver. But for the most part, my rankings are pretty consistent, whether it's redraft to best ball or if it's dynasty to in a dynasty best ball format. And redraft, I've got Ryan Tannehill as my QB 8 right now, just between Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. You can kind of I don't think I could raise him ahead of Rodgers, but yeah, I view him and Russell Wilson as basically the same guys. 2 elite receivers on a run-heavy offense, so they have the chance to kind of lose passing attempt, but they make up for it by the rushing production. But last couple of years, Tannehill's been better at getting the rushing touchdowns. Wilson hasn't been doing it. We saw a ton in his not just as a rookie, but his first 2-3 years in the league. Like Wilson was giving you those elite rushing numbers, but not so much now. So I do prefer Tannehill right now. So I apparently have been so high on him that I've got him in about a third of my best ball leagues.
Running back.
So this gets to my most rostered best ball player overall. I've got him in over 50% of these best ball leagues. 5 out of the 9, I've got Devin Singletary. I view where he's going a lot of the cases, 9th, 10th, 11th round. Superflex might even push it down further. He has a chance to be the lead back in Buffalo, and I think Zach Moss is also a value. But I find he's generally going ahead of Singletary. And I do have Moss ranked ahead of Singletary. It's just Singletary is so cheap that I'm just grabbing him every time he's in that 9th, 10th round. I just feel like he's such a value for a potential starting running back. It's good. It's great value. I mean, is he going to be that starting running back? Is it just going to be a 50-50 split anyway? Who knows? But I'm taking the chance, especially in best ball, where Singletary's kind of got that ability to break long runs. You don't know when he's necessarily going to score touchdowns. Whereas I think Moss, this team's really weak against run defense. Or really weak at run defense. So if they get close, Moss can punch it in easily. Like you can maybe predict a little more with Moss. With Singletary, not so much. And those are the guys I like in best ball, where there's touchdowns to be had, there's spike weeks. But if they're in a redraft league, you might not start them at the right time. In best ball, you don't have to worry about it. So Singletary, my most rostered running back and most rostered player overall.
Yeah, it's interesting. Big problem with Buffalo might be that Josh Allen steals all the rushing touchdowns.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the risk. And I think that's why both are going so low though. So that risk is also baked into their prices. So then, and at least that's what I'm seeing. I especially view Singletary as such a value because of that.
To be honest with you, in a couple of these mock drafts of wide receiver, I've been drafting Jalen Water and thinking, even if I don't, in a redraft league, he might be a boom or bust guy, but in a best ball draft, he might be the perfect guy to have because if he goes 3 for 120 and 2 scores, bingo.
Mm-hmm. And he didn't have to predict that week in best ball. So yeah, that is the appeal. So I feel I would in theory be more aggressive on the rookies, especially the rookie wide receivers in best ball. I'll be honest, I'm not really all that excited about this rookie class of wide receivers. And I didn't love the landing spots. I feel like the more as time goes on, the more I'm just kind of avoiding them all in drafts unless I'm getting them in the last few rounds. So, yeah, I'm looking through my. I really don't have many rookie wide receivers in best ball leagues. Actually, I'm usually going for the rookie quarterbacks because of Superflex, or maybe some of the rookie running backs. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I've got a share of, although that's a very particular league for a very particular reason. I've got a share of Devontae Smith. So maybe him because okay, he might get a lot of targets. I think in that league, he might have fallen far enough to where I thought he was a value. But yeah, I really have not been going much on the rookies, but best ball would be the place to do it. So yeah, if anyone who's believing in Waddle thinks that Waddle can become the number one receiver as early as this year, then he's probably going as a good value because there's so much uncertainty. He's being priced down.
So then, what wide receiver would you take in best ball drafts?
So and this is a player that I like will show kind of like how much effect the best ball does have. If it's anywhere, it's wide receiver. I have Henry Ruggs ranked a lot higher in best ball than I do in other formats, simply because it's tough to see the upside, or it's tough to know when those upside weeks are coming. But if they ever hit, he's got the skill set to kind of make them big. Obviously, didn't really last year, but 3 shares of Ruggs. I also have 3 shares of someone that I've nicknamed Free Kufri, because Kiki Kuti for the Texans is basically free in every league. So I've got 3 shares of him in best ball as well. Another guy at a third of my best ball leagues, and I just think Brandon Cooks is probably going to lead the Texans in targets, but number 2 on that team, I think it's a massive question mark. Maybe it's the rookie Nico Collins. I think Kiki Kuti has shown to come in I always go back to his very first game as a rookie. Deshaun Watson targeted him 12 times. And I mean, this is with DeAndre Hopkins on the field. Will Fuller was probably hurt, but even if Will Fuller wasn't hurt, guessing he was hurt, well, that's probably a good guess. But that doesn't happen by accident. Rookie doesn't just come in and get those targets for no reason. The talent's there with Kiki Kuti, and I think this might finally be the year that it unlocks. No Bill O'Brien there seems like Bill O'Brien didn't like him, even though he was partially responsible for drafting him. I don't know. Huge mismanaged, because every time he's been on the field, he's produced well. It's just he's had such a hard time getting on the field. So take late shots. Usually I'm getting him in the last round, second to last round, again basically free. So yeah, Kiki Kuti is kind of the guy I'm pumping up. And again, I've targeted Henry Ruggs as someone I prefer in best ball to other formats, so maybe a bit more aggressive on him in best ball.
And
Chris Godwin, of all the top ranked receivers, I've got 2 shares of Chris Godwin, but I really haven't been targeting the high end receivers very much. He's the highest ranked guy that I have multiple shares of. So sorry to interrupt.
And tight end.
Tight end, it's similar to receiver where it's very flat. I'm much more convicted on running backs, which is why I end up with 5 shares of Singletary, or a pair of shares of Naeem Hines, David Johnson. Funny, I've got 2 shares of David Johnson and Phillip Lindsay, but tight end, I've got a lot of shares of just one guy. 3 guys I do have multiple shares of, though. Evan Ingram, Tyler Higbee, and I suppose the guy I should have led with, because he's much better, is TJ Hawkinson. So those have been kind of the 3 I've been going after. And the thing with Hawkinson, it does kind of lead to another point, if I may, talking about a strategy that I've really put in this year. And it's someone that I've heard a few best ball people, or people who do best ball podcasts specifically, talk about it. But Tyler McLaughlin from the True North Fantasy Pod, he's mentioned this as kind of a strategy to do: target an entire team in a best ball draft. And so not so much the eliminators, those are tricky to do that with, but some other best ball leagues I've done, I've kind of been conscious of, if there's a team that seems like the value lines up, I want to get most of the entire team. And the thinking there is you target teams that may score enough points. I did it once in one of the best ball leagues. I did it with the Bills. I did it right off the bat. I went Josh Allen, then Stephon Diggs, and then later in the draft, I think I might have missed on Emmanuel Sanders, but I got both the running backs, Moss and Singletary. I think I got a Cole Beasley, Gabe Davis in there. So it just, I targeted those guys almost entirely. I think I got Dawson Knox and Hollister, so extreme, thinking that, okay, and then kind of avoided that bye week, whatever bye week the Bills have. I think, can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but whatever week it was, I'm not going to target players. I'm going to try and avoid players that also have that bye week, knowing that bye week's kind of reserved for me and my team for the Bills. I've got that entire roster. And if they score enough points, it doesn't matter who scores them, because I've got basically the entire team. If Emmanuel Sanders scores them, I'm still getting them with Josh Allen anyway, and that's the one guy I missed on. But yeah, so the entire team thing, and I know you're a hockey fan too, so you might appreciate this. This is not something that I intended to do going in, but when the opportunity presented it, I decided to do it, and I'm glad I did because it's a fun concept. So it's the Canadian National Best Ball Champions League. So 6 leagues of 16 teams, all doing best ball drafts. So I mean, kudos to that there's so many Canadians that are willing to draft that we're able to get 16 team drafts going for this best ball league. And because the theme this year with the 6 leagues was original 6 teams, and I'm a Detroit Red Wings fan, so I joined the Detroit division. Had the fortune of getting the 101, and because super flex, Mahomes, no question. And then when it came back to the 216 301, there's premium scoring for the tight ends. And so I thought at this turn, TJ Hawkinson makes sense. Like, okay, yeah, it's the Detroit Red Wings division. Of course, I'll go with the Detroit Lions. And then I'm looking at my running back ranks, and it was between DeAndre Swift and Aaron Jones. And this was done on Canada Day, or at least the draft started on Canada Day. Probably made these picks maybe the next day, maybe the day after, because 16 team, it did take a bit to get back. But early July, we didn't know for sure about Aaron Rodgers. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to go all in on this Detroit team. This is the team I'm going to target for this draft. I didn't feel like I forced it there. Like, I felt like Hawkinson was the pick, and maybe Aaron Jones should have been the pick over DeAndre Swift. I maybe forced it with that one, but again, with my rankings, Swift was that next running back after. So I just decided, okay, I'll reach, quote unquote, reach. And I mean, Jones went 4 picks later. So I say I reached 4 picks for Swift. That's my logic anyway. Maybe it's not the case, but maybe if I hadn't picked him, he would have come back to me. But I decided then to go Jared Goff in the 4th round as my second quarterback, thinking that if, because 16 team, a lot of them went in that 2nd and 3rd round and well, 1st round, obviously. So by passing on quarterback in that 2-3 turn, I knew I took a risk, and then Goff came back to me. I thought my lineup presents the most upside if I get all the Lions. Like, if Hawkinson scores 2 touchdowns, probably from Goff, so I get that kind of counted double in my lineup. If Swift catches a receiving touchdown, or if it's a game where, okay, the Lions score 4 touchdowns, Goff threw 2 and Swift ran in 2, I get all those points. So I felt that at that time that the quarterbacks left, Sam Darnold, Mac Jones, like both the Patriots guys, both the Saints guys, all the uncertain quarterbacks. But even like the rookies, like Lance Fields, those guys were long gone. So I felt Goff was the best option. And then I knew, okay, the Lions receivers, I can get them pretty cheap. And then I just kind of picked them off one by one at every alternating turn. Amon-Ra St. Brown in the 11th round, Brashad Perryman in the 13th round, Quintez Cephas even in the 15th round. That might have been a wasted pick. And that's another one where I took Kiki Kuti late. So, I decided to have some fun with that. The Detroit Red Wings division, I thought, I'm going to build the Detroit Lions offense in the Detroit Red Wings division. So drafting's also supposed to be fun. And I get, maybe I reached a little bit on Swift, but I felt I did it still at good value. So, so that's a strategy that can also be taken in best ball leagues. If you feel like, not necessarily to reach on it, but if like the players you're taking and you get into the middle rounds and suddenly you're deciding between a few wide receivers, I could pair this guy with my quarterback, I'd probably take that for sure. I'm definitely in the boat that wide receivers don't matter. Not that like you ignore the position, but which wide receiver you take doesn't really matter from a week to week basis. There's so little floor on all wide receivers that like find reasons to differentiate high ceiling. And if it stacks with a quarterback, that's a really good reason. And that's a principle I kind of follows all leagues, dynasty, redraft, but certainly in best ball.
Interesting. I mean, the Detroit Red Wings fan taking all lines. I mean, at this rate, you should have taken Megatron.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, because I feel like I took Le'Veon Bell, so I would have been just as good taking Calvin Johnson. You're right. I should have. That's on me.
So, who's the one player you would try and get in all best ball leagues?
Again, I think it's Singletary. And can I add a question to this? The one I'm avoiding in all leagues is basically for the same reason, Chase Edmonds. And maybe you can help me with this, because I really don't get it, because those guys are going very different, like usually 4 rounds apart, sometimes even more. And I really don't see the difference between the two. And I think maybe that's why I'm going so heavily on Singletary. I see that a similar type of upside to Edmonds. They both have rushing quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, kind of stealing away touchdowns. They both have guys brought in afterwards, Zach Moss, James Conner, kind of showing we don't trust these guys as goal line backs. The touchdown upside belongs to Moss and Connor. I definitely prefer those two to Singletary, Edmonds. But while Moss is going ahead of Singletary, Edmonds is going far ahead of James Conner, and I really don't get it, which is also making me want to be a little more aggressive on Connor. But like I really just view Edmonds and Singletary as the same player. They both like neither has early round draft capital. They're both kind of I think third or fourth round picks. Like the athleticism isn't that much greater than with Edmonds than it is with Singletary, and we've seen Singletary be able to break off long runs in the NFL. So like he's got NFLism, but nothing special. But I also don't see that with Edmonds. Like it's okay, NFL, enough to be a running back in the NFL. That takes a little more than the average athleticism, but like he's not a J.K. Dobbins that can just like, super efficient. And yeah, I think Edmonds, he has to catch a lot of passes, and Kyler Murray, while he's passing a lot, it's also there's a ton of wide receivers to compete with. Running quarterbacks tend not to dump off to their running backs. They tend to take it and run. So I just apparently I'm going after Singletary a lot, and I think as a consequence I'm avoiding Chase Edmonds because I view them as the same player. But what I'm seeing in drafts is they're going multiple rounds apart. Sometimes 4 rounds apart, and I really don't get it with Edmonds.
Yeah, I mean, how many leagues has Chase Edmonds screwed up the last few years? It seems like every year, like, oh, this is Chase Edmonds' swing, and he gets like 15 yards, and I'm like, why the bleep do I use this dude?
I mean, he's a good pass catcher. I think you target him and Singletary, I think, in games where you think the Bills/Cardinals aren't going to run over this team. This is going to be a highly contested game. They're going to be passing into the fourth quarter. That's where you want those guys. That's where you want Chase Edmonds and Singletary. But like I've seen, and not to say this is, I think this was a best ball draft. It was a FFPC, and I'll shout out to another Canadian, Goat District. JD is a Canadian. I know sometimes a lot of the co-hosts he has aren't, but they were doing a best ball draft live on the show, and someone took Chase Edmonds at the 312, literally at that second 2-3 turn, or that 3-4 turn. And I don't know, like that really, and I mean, everyone on the show was kind of the same. Everyone in the comments too was like, that's way too early. Like this guy's kind of ruined his team a little. Like his first 2 picks were all right, but you're giving up all that value on a running back that may not even be the lead back. Like it's getting ridiculous with Chase Edmonds. So I wrote an article about him. It wasn't necessarily, I think it's more redraft geared, but I think it applies to best ball too. He's the running back to avoid for me. I know Raheem Mostert's going in that range too. He was my avoid last year. I had 0 shares, probably going to be the case again this year. So Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, and I'm really convicted on running backs. It's hard for me to find a wide receiver that I think is totally out of place, because I feel like it's just a giant flat tier. You almost pick your preference once you get to even as early as the 4th round. But with running backs, I see Mostert and Edmonds in the 5th round sometimes. A lot of drafts are ADP, and I just don't understand it with either. So those are the 2 guys that I'm avoiding in all formats, including best ball.
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see what happens with all these different leagues starting and drafting. So, thanks for hopping on, Kyle. Now my best ball drafting skills are ready to rumble, and I hope to dominate this draft on Wednesday.
Yeah, I really hope it goes well. Hope you get the quarterbacks you like at the end of the first and early second. That'd be a swell dream to get 2 elite quarterbacks there. But certainly, yeah, I think hopefully I've prepared you well and prepared your listeners well. I'm still learning too, and I know this was a big year for me in terms of step up in best ball. Definitely focused in on the content more and kind of what I've learned, what I've gone through the draft so far, just sharing it with everyone I can. So again, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity, Dylan.
Thank you for hopping on.